I'm so excited for this conversation. I made a friend, Sejal Thakkar, quite a few months ago. She was introduced to me by a mutual friend who thought we would hit it off and that we would have a good conversation to have. Uh, we didn't even really know what we were going to talk about. We just really enjoyed each other, liked each other, both have some expertise to share. And in the months following, quite a bit has happened, and we decided to have our conversation on the mic. Uh, what you'll hear in our voices is that both of us recently just lost someone very close to us. We were just talking before we turned on the mic, and I said, let's find our professional selves to do this. But the truth is, real life shows up when you go to work. Real life shows up no matter where you are, and you are where you are. So in order to be real, when you hear that in our voice, and we'll talk about it a little bit, we both lost someone. So, we want to acknowledge that. The reason Sejal is going to be here today, she's an expert in diversity and inclusion. She's also a lawyer, and this is her passion in life. And the thing that we connected on was the difficult conversations we need to have in the workplace. Because I don't know if you noticed, but I've noticed that it's divisive here in the world. We're having conversations about the silliest things and getting really mad at each other for things that should be just universal. So things about like race and politics, spirituality, and money, and all of that is just at a fever pitch right now. So we want to talk about how we can maybe do better there. So, but officially, Sejal Thakkar is on a mission to educate and empower people to create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Sejal is a former employment law attorney. She's a two-time TEDx speaker. And by the way, her TED Talk, the link is going to be in the show notes because she's such a good speaker and it's a good talk. She's a founder and chief civility officer for Train Extra, where she helps leaders create positive, safe, and respectful workplaces through customized training and coaching. And she's also responsible for cultivating a people-first culture at Nobody Studios, which we'll ask her about that. But Sejal, that's a long way of saying hi. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mark. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
So
And I
let's
have to
start.
give a shout out to Meredith Bell, right? She's the one that introduced us. I'm a huge fan. I was trying to figure out when we got introduced, and I remember what you wrote in response to her introduction. You're like, the four most typed words on LinkedIn. I really appreciate you. And I agree. Meredith has made some amazing introductions like you and several other folks. So I just wanted to give her a shout out too.
She has this uncanny understanding of who to connect with who when.
Mhm.
It's really it's quite breathtaking. So let's start with being real. So like how are I mentioned in the introduction that we both lost someone recently. How are you doing?
It's true. It does come in waves, Mark. It's like some days I feel like I have a lot of energy and I'm able to, focus on things. And other days I can't even remember, like what I'm doing that day. And I just looked at my schedule, right? So I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm doing a lot of reflecting. And so I was really looking forward to this conversation because the name of your podcast, right? And I'm like, I was thinking you were going to ask me the question like, overwhelm, how do you overcome it or something? And I was like, I'm in the midst of it right now. So I am still overcoming that period of just like grief, and losing someone super close to you and suddenly. So
Super suddenly, yeah.
super suddenly, unexpected.
So yeah, like how do you deal with it? The question isn't how do you get out of the overwhelm of what you're in, because again, grief is one of those things that has no rules.
Yeah.
I've learned. Diana Bonici, one of my first podcast interviews, we had a conversation about grief, and it is the number one. Dealing with grief is the number one by 400% podcast I've done. And I'm always like, I can handle this. My professional self is I can get myself to fly right. And I was late for our call. Right? Like, okay, maybe I can't. So for me, my grief is showing up as anger at this point. I don't know what it's going to be tomorrow or the next day. So dealing with that, and now to put on our professional selves to have a conversation. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, you know what? It's okay. You have to give yourself grace, and I notice there's times where I'm short with my son, or I'm at my like just boiling point, and it comes out in different ways. And I just give myself grace. And I just stop whenever I start feeling that way. I just stop and just say, okay, it's okay. This thing can wait. This podcast can wait. This meeting can wait. And I'm very open about it with my connections to say, I think I rescheduled our podcast once during this entire time to say, I just can't right now. I can't do it. I can't
Mm,
show up. I'm really resilient. I've gone through a ton of crap in my life and I can bounce back. But there's just some things that happen that I'm just like, I can't muster up the energy to go through this right now. And I hope this person will understand. And there have been some people that have not been so understanding, and that's okay. But I need to be honest and real with myself. And that's why I appreciate you bringing this up, because, we are one person. We can we can say, I can disassociate with my personal self to get through the next hour. But like you said, you can hear it in our voice. It's a part of who we are. It impacts the conversation we're even going to have today. Right. So,
yeah. What do you think makes you so resilient?
I feel like I've had a lot of obstacles show up in my life and I've had to overcome them. And so going through this process of, what I talked about in my first TEDx talk, what I talk about my second TEDx talk is you learn a lot about the lessons you're supposed to learn going through these situations. And I've always looked at obstacles as, what is this trying to teach me? That's always been my default, even with losing my, good friend. I still come out of it with gratitude in the fact that I got to spend a lot of time with him in the last few months. I've known him for over 16 years, but we really connected. And it's like a double-edged sword, because on one hand it hurts a lot more because I lost somebody I was super close to. But on the other hand, I feel like, wow, I was given the opportunity to share his love, receive his love, his unconditional love. And I'm grateful for having that opportunity. And so I always kind of try to level that field in my head to say, what can I be grateful for? What are the lessons? What can I do to pay it forward, what he's given me, And
Mhm.
so that's kind of how I've been dealing with my grief, Mark, is really saying there were things that he was teaching me while he was here and what I remember about him. And that was his unconditional love, his positivity, his generosity. And my job now is to carry his legacy forward. And that's how I get through the anger and the grief and all of that, to just say, how can I pay this forward?
Yeah, someone wrote on my Facebook page when they saw the what I wrote about my brother dying, your grief is your love. Like
Mhm.
the grief is your love. And I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
It's like I know that I teach this stuff, and I'm very clearly not there yet. Right now, I'm just grumpy about it, and it comes out, hopefully responsibly, but it comes out, and I wish it were different, and it's not. So yeah, interesting. So again, now let's move to the topic of conversation. So like what's interesting is you and we got on the call and we immediately shared what was going on with each other,
Mhm.
which created a connection immediately, right? You might have been annoyed that I was late, and I know you weren't, but because we know each other and you probably trusted that something happened, like
Sure.
bonehead forgetting. But if you were annoyed, right, we shared something. Now we have a shared understanding, and you're like, oh my god, of course he was late, he's grieving. Like I've done the same thing, and being honest like that, where most people would just not talk about that, right? How do you create connections in the world to bridge those gaps so quickly?
First of all, I was not upset with you for being a few
I
minutes late. I think we're all trying to do our best in life. And Mark, I mean, it feels like at times that we're the only ones going through hard things, but we're not. I mean, I've had so many conversations with people, and I'm like, wow, everybody seems like they're struggling right now. And as far as building connection goes, I think it boils down to just effective communication, and that can be really challenging for times when you're laser focused on, we're going to talk about, let's say you're a leader and you're having a meeting and you're like, this is what I'm going to talk about, but you forget that we're human beings and there's things that were going on in our lives that we're dealing with. If you don't take that time to build that connection, and I say this over and over again, I go, you have to make time and be present with people. If you can just learn that one skill, everything else will fall into place. And that's not to say you'll get every outcome you want, but you'll build that connection. And so when there are those
Hold on, so I got to slow you down because
yeah,
you just gave a really good instruction. Because my first question would have been, how do you have effective communication? How do you learn that skill? And I think what you just said was the secret was you have to slow down and be present first.
that's right. Yeah, you have to make time to be present, which is like different than the way that we're wired, right? Especially in our culture, it's the hustle culture. It's go get the next thing, or it's the shiny object and the next goal. And so we're always on that rat race, or the train to nowhere, right? And we don't really make time to say, oh my God, Mark, you're going through something really difficult. Like, I know we're here to talk about something professional, but we have to make sure that that I see you and I'm here for you, and we can talk about whatever we need to understand that you're a human being going through some tough times right now, and anybody needs support during that time. But we don't do that. And even in any environment, whether it's a professional environment or a personal environment, we're so laser focused. So the first step is to make that time to be present with that person, to acknowledge, to see them, to value them, because there are always going to be deadlines. There's always going to be goals. There's always going to be things that we're looking to accomplish. But guess what? If we don't build those connections with each other, there are some things that are just bigger than us that
Mm.
we can't accomplish on our own, right? I mean, I'm just coming out of a massive personal crisis that I went through, and it took a community of people to come together to get me through it. And I realized right away, I believe in myself and I know what I can accomplish, but this was way bigger than me. And I knew that right away. And luckily I do make time to build these connections. And so I reached out to people and I said, I need help right now. And you have to be vulnerable enough to say, I need help. And for a lot of us, right, that's hard to do. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times I have asked for help in my life. It's less than five. Right?
Right.
Less than five. And so I've always done everything on my own, and so it was really, really hard. But when you build connections with people and you have that rapport with people, no matter how challenging the situation is, whether it's personal or professional, you can have these difficult conversations with people. I need help, or how you deliver bad news, or tell somebody they lost a loved one, or told somebody they're going to be laid off from their work. It doesn't really matter what the topic is, or how divisive that conversation is, or how sensitive it is. It really is even more basic and foundational than that, is that we will deal with those difficult situations, but let's get the foundations right. And how do we connect with each other? And coming out of COVID, this people have forgotten how to communicate face to face. We've been isolated, we've
Mm.
been disconnected, we've been at home. And so now people are struggling with those basic things, right? And so that's why I love
How
this.
is that showing up? How do you see that showing up? Because you work with companies teaching stuff.
Yeah. I
How
mean,
are you seeing that?
it's showing up because it's creating a lot of conflict within work environments, and it goes both ways. So companies are looking at this thinking, okay, we're dodging huge bullets because now people are not face to face, so we're going to have less conflict. And the opposite is happening, is now you're having more conflict because people are already feeling disconnected. And now we're having to communicate through different means like video conferencing, texting, Slack. So there's all these different ways we're communicating, and yet we're disconnected. We don't really know how to do that face-to-face communication. How do you build rapport with somebody through a video conference? If you don't know how to do that, you might just get on the call like most leaders do and say, oh, here's our agenda. Okay, let's go around and talk about what
And
you've
let's
done.
get off as soon as possible.
Yeah, and tell me what you've accomplished in the last week. Well, what I've also accomplished is I've survived. I'm standing here and I'm barely standing here, but we're not going to talk about that. All you care about is the numbers or the metrics of what I've accomplished. So it does require more time. It requires the skills to build that trust, that rapport. And where I see this sitting manage, it's like middle managers, companies are struggling because people don't have those, I like to call them key facilitation or key communication skills on having these conversations. So if you're leading a conversation, if you're having the conversation, there are some basic things that you need to know. And believe me, I'm constantly learning too. So I'm not the expert, person on having.
Actually, you are the expert and you're still learning.
I'm always learning. Yeah, I'm always going to be learning. That's just how I'm wired.
Take us through it. What are some of the steps?
Well, yeah. So, I think we have to step back and take a look at what makes certain conversations more challenging or difficult, right? What are some of those elements? And depending on what those elements are, what strategies you use to help you navigate through some of those difficult conversations is going to be different, right? So, for example, if you have a conversation between two people, right, you and I are talking right now, and we're very emotional about a loss that both of us have recently had to deal with. And so our emotions are high. We might be really passionate about certain topics right now. And so recognizing that, you and I both have to make a conscious effort to realize, well, Mark has just lost somebody. And so I have to be aware of your responses and give you grace, knowing that you're doing the best that you can with what you're going through. And so
hold on, that's really interesting. I got to stop because there's like you say things that are second nature to you, and it's so good. By giving me grace, where I am in the grief process is anger. And I had to call someone back yesterday and say, I didn't mean the anger to be, like what was left in that conversation was that I was mad at you, and I wasn't mad at you, but what came out of my mouth. So the same thing here. We don't know how I'm going to come across because I'm in the middle of something.
No, but knowing that piece of information helps me significantly, right? Because if I know that you're dealing with a lot and you're struggling emotionally and you're vulnerable about it with me, I also know the other part, which is that when you have passionate or strong feelings about somebody, that's going to interfere with your ability to think and act logically in all circumstances. Normally, Mark would respond this way, but it's not a normal situation. So he might respond with sarcasm. He might be passive aggressive. He might be impatient. That's normal given his current situation. And so recognizing that is an important part of it. Other things that make conversations difficult are like power dynamics, right? When you have disparities in power, disparities in privilege, that you have to acknowledge that those things are real, number one, because some people still deny that there's power or there's privilege. Well, there are. And you have to accept and acknowledge that, because there are going to be certain imbalances that are going to happen within that conversation that are going to make it easy or give, I like to say, unearned advantages to some and maybe unearned disadvantages to others. And so that's going to make a conversation more difficult or challenging. And then also, a lot of times when you're dealing with what we're dealing with in the world right now, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Uncertainty about what the outcome might be in the conversation, or what if there's a lot of change, there's a lot of fear out there right now. So these are certain things that are going to make conversations more difficult. So there's a first step is to identify what are the certain circumstances surrounding this conversation and why is it difficult? And that's the first step. Once you do that, then you can say, okay, I like to always tell people, recognize that in every conversation, there are actually 3 different conversations going on all at the same time. And so if you want to be more of an effective communicator, you have to be able to identify all 3 of those conversations that are going on at the same time and then respond accordingly, right? You can't just respond to one thing. So I know what you're going to ask me. What are those 3 conversations that are going on, right? Well, again, the first one is who's right and who's wrong, right? This is the whole what's happened to conversation. Something happened.
That's the most important thing. We have to
It's so
establish who's right and who's wrong before we can ever move on.
And by default, what we want to do when something goes wrong is we want to point the finger at something. We want to blame somebody. So it's this whole thing of what actually happened versus what should have happened. And who do we blame for why we're not there, right? So there, you have the what's happened conversation. And then you have the feelings conversation, that I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm dealing with grief right now. And so I'm having a hard time expressing and understanding my own feelings, let alone communicating that to other people, right? So then you have the feelings conversation that's going on at the same time. And then you have this third conversation, which I like to say is like your identity conversation. How is Mark going to view me after this if I tell him that I'm going through this situation and I'm struggling right now and I'm doing my best? Is this going to affect the way that he looks at me professionally? Is he not going to hire me now because he thinks that I'm having a hard time dealing with my grief? And there might be people that may not hire you because you're being vulnerable about what you're going through, And so, but once you get to the point where you start recognizing what are the three that are going on, then you can figure out what strategies you can use to overcome that particular conversation that's difficult, right? So I'll just stop there and let you kind of guide me from there.
No, that's just really fascinating to me. Like if you just take a little time to be present, because this goes into your bias conversation. One, like we just come into every conversation with all this stuff going on. We think we're just having a conversation. I joke with people that you're not in the boardroom with other adults. You're 5-year-olds in the boardroom with other 5-year-olds, and you're just having that. You all you shave your face or you shave your legs, but you're still all 5-year-olds having a conversation. And once you realize that, then you can grow yourself up and have a more effective conversation. In addition to that, we're bringing our biases, we're bringing our judgments, we're bringing our fears, we're bringing the three conversations you just spoke about. I'm curious, how do you get people to understand this? Because you mentioned some people don't believe there's advantages to, one race or whatever, like that kind of thing. And it's a trigger for them. They go even further into the belligerence about that. How do you neutralize that to say, I'm not saying, you're bad because you're white. I'm not saying you didn't work hard because you have a certain privilege. I'm saying that there is a dynamic that just is, and we just want to acknowledge it. How do you get people to hear that don't want to hear that?
Yeah, it's all about normalizing the conversation, Mark. And that's really the reason why I did the first TEDx talk. Like that is the reason, because I started doing these workshops on unconscious bias. And as soon as I would say the word bias, people, I could just see them roll in their eyes, like, I don't have any bias. And I was just like, I'm not going to get past this until we normalize this conversation. So my approach has always been in the work that I do is really providing information. And I can't change anybody's opinions. That's not what I'm trying to do. When I work with organizations, I'm educating people on behaviors. And if there's certain behaviors going on, we can do something about that. But at the end of the day, whether a person says they have unconscious bias or they don't, that's not really the outcome I'm looking for. I am raising awareness on these issues. And then I like to say, I open the door. I'm the teacher that, like they say in Buddhism, right? Where teachers open the door and the student has to walk in. That's literally how I go into it. And I think that mentality is super important because, there's a lot of people that do the work that I do and they have this sort of shove it down their throats kind of mentality because that's their approach. That's not my approach. That has never worked for me, not as a lawyer either. And that's when I realized, like, I'm not going to be a litigation attorney for a long time because I'm not going to be like that. I'm more of a conflict resolution person. And so when I talk to people, I'm talking to the white guy, I'm talking to the brown person, I'm talking to the black person, I'm talking to the lesbian, the gay, I'm talking to everybody, right? Because these are, again, effective communication is something we all need to learn how to do, right? And so there are certain skills, and I hate using that term. We need to come up with a better way of saying this, but soft skills. Like, I hate that. That's one of my pet peeves of even referring to it. It's actually the most important skills that we don't get taught. You know?
Mark Hirschberg, a former guest of mine, called it firm skills.
Firm skill.
Like he said, there's the soft skills of being nice and this and that, then there's the hard skills of being able to do math and that kind of things. And then there's the firm skills, which is leadership and having conversations and, the thing that's the glue in an organization.
Yeah. And so I think that when we go back to, having these challenging conversations, I think a couple of things I tell people to do is that you have to prepare for the conversation. So if I know that later on today, I'm going to be having a difficult conversation with an employee who's really having some issues with their leader or with a coworker, I can't just show up to that conversation unprepared. I need to really get prepared on that. So some of the things that I do is identify what are the different points of view. What is this employee going to be sharing with me or telling me, or potentially sharing with me and telling me? And what is the other person going to be telling me, right? And so that's where I put on my lawyer hat and I'm like, identify the different points of view, reality check. There are going to be times we're not going to agree on everything and we might disagree on certain things. So before you go into the conversation, identify what those might be so that you can relate and acknowledge and connect with that person and say, I hear where you're coming from. But you can also use that situation to educate them and aware them that there might be other perspectives on this situation as well, right? So identify what those different beliefs are. And then you talked about this earlier, Mark, is we make assumptions about things all the time. It's just how our brain works, right? So if you have a brain, you're going to do this. So identify what are the assumptions you yourself are walking into that conversation with. Are you making assumptions about this person because they want to talk to you? Are you making assumptions about the situation? Are you making assumptions? And when I say assumptions, they could be good assumptions or they could be bad assumptions, any kind of assumptions.
The answer is yes, you're making assumptions. We don't know what they are, but you're making assumptions.
You're making certain assumptions, right? And in your hidden biases, right? You might have certain preconceived notions. So you want to be aware of that before you walk in. So you can, what I say is check it at the door, right? So if she or he is coming at me and they want to talk to me about a situation they're having with a coworker and they recognize they're very heated, and I know this because I read the email carefully and I see a bunch of exclamation marks and words in caps, and I can understand this person is emotional. But I also know that they filed 4 other complaints against this person before. So are there certain things that this person might be bringing to that conversation that I want to be prepared to address with them in that moment? Because remember, these difficult conversations are difficult, but this might be your only opportunity to talk to that employee or that person about this topic. So you want to maximize the time that you have with that person. And then we already talked about emotional intelligence, like what might be the emotions that are going to come into that. So you have to prepare for the conversation. You can't just show up, nod your head, make a little bit of eye contact and think that's going to help. I mean, that's what I hear sometimes. And I'm like, it's a lot more work. Building trust and connection with one another takes a lot of time and energy. It's ongoing. You and I have this great relationship right now, but if I don't talk to you for the next year, we're going to have to make sure we continue to nurture our relationship, right? Otherwise, it's just going to fade away. And that's what happens in workplaces. We get so caught up on meeting our numbers and being productive and moving on to the next thing that we forget, wait, I haven't talked to Mark in over a year. Wait, I wonder how he's doing. So when I need help, is Mark going to show up for me? No, not if I haven't talked to him in a year. But if I've taken the time to build that and nurture that relationship, if I need help, I can go to Mark and say, hey, I'm struggling right now. Mark, I need some help. Can you help me on this? Right. And so very important for leaders, especially, I'll say this, all leaders, but especially middle management. That's where I'm seeing a lot of the problems in the work that I'm doing is that middle management is really struggling right now with how to have these difficult conversations.
You really validate. We're building the Rising Leader workshop. And one of the things we do is it's leading up, leading across, leading your team, and leading yourself. In leading up, the first thing we do is we build a boss empathy map. Like, who is your boss? What do they value? What do they care about? What triggers them? What, that kind of thing. And then we do it with your peers. take some time and learn who your peers are. What are their triggers? What are their, what are their goals? All that stuff. And then you do that with your people, right? And then and one of the exercises is to have their people go into a room or a Zoom room or something and do a boss empathy map of them. And like, how brave is that? When we're building this, it's so important that they do this, because once you get into middle management and upper management and the C-suite, your relationships and your communication skills are your ticket, right? Those are the things you got to do. You no longer do, you've got to get other people to do. You got to get everybody to row. And I was thinking as I'm building, I'm like, people are just going to look at me like I'm crazy. Do I spend that much time learning who these people are? And what you're saying is, yeah, you do.
Yes, you do. And we need more empathy in this world. We really need to teach people empathy. It's a teachable, you could teach people how to do it. And I think if we spent more time, I'm so glad you're doing that work, Mark, and thank you for doing that work, because empathy is a great way to get into some of these conversations, and the way you're doing it is fabulous. So I'm a huge supporter.
I'm teaching them not to do, but I'm also teaching them not to do it as like, this is just a good thing to be a good person. Right. If you want to be a trusted advisor to your CEO, you have to know who they are, what they care about, right? If you want to build a team of peers that are supportive and connected versus competitors who are jockeying, you've got to learn these skills. Because again, when you get promoted, do you want people who aren't supporting you and backstabbing you, or do you want people to go, yes, he's so glad he or she is the one who's promoted? So it really is in self-interest to do this.
Absolutely. And I think by doing that too, you open the door to have people deal with some uncomfortableness, right? Of having these conversations. And sorry to break it to everybody, but you have to get through and break through that uncomfortableness. Like, I think one of the things that's very important for an effective communicator is how you get people into that uncomfortable category. How you get them into that zone. How do you bring out a conversation that you know is not going to be well received by anybody, but you got to do it so that we can deal with that issue and move forward. A lot of times leaders don't want to go into those spaces because they're like, oh, if I open this door, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, you better open that door. The quicker, the better, because if you're afraid of what's going to happen, that means you need to deal with that issue now before it hits the media, before it goes outside of your organization, right? And so one of the things I think, again, having my legal background has really helped me in facilitating these conversations, because I'm not afraid of going into those uncomfortable categories. And when I see that what I'm saying is making people uncomfortable, I'm okay with that. I can help navigate us through that situation and hopefully come out feeling a little bit more uncomfortable, more comfortable, not uncomfortable, more comfortable. Not to say that we're going to get the result that we want every time, that everyone's going to be huggy feeling and feeling great about each other. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if we get through that conversation and we feel more comfortable with talking about it, we've accomplished our mission, because then we can talk about it again, we could talk about it again, and we can get to the root cause of the issue and actually solve that problem versus what we normally do when we're having difficult conversations. We want to avoid that thing altogether. We're like, I don't want to touch that. I don't have time to touch that right now. I'm dealing with enough on my plate, right? So yeah, it's huge.
Well, that's another thing we're doing in the Rising Leader program is you don't have time to deal with that stuff, but it's actually your primary job, right? Like, you have to shift your idea of what your job is, because your job is to deal with that stuff.
It's the job. And empathy is the number one, I feel like number one skill. People need to learn to connect with one another. And the second, I hope you agree with me on this, is teaching people how to actively listen.
I teach presence. Yeah. I tell my people, I said, look, I can either teach you all these skills,
yeah,
or you can become present. Yeah. Like, if you learn to become present, we don't have to play whack-a-mole with all these, like how to have these conversations and stuff, because you'll be listening. You'll be able to respond instead of react. You'll understand what's going on in the room. So it's such an important skill.
So I'm curious, Mark, I'm going to ask you a question now. So how do you teach people to be present? I'm curious. You can share.
The first thing I do is I teach them to breathe. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I just breathe. Like, just take a deep breath. Like, all right, where are you breathing from now? Like my dogs are barking their heads off while I'm trying to record a professional
You're putting you
podcast,
on mute.
right? They're just losing their shit. Of course, and they've been quiet and sleeping all day, right? But where am I breathing from? Oh, I'm breathing from my chest. So I'm a little bit in fight or flight. So I slow down my breathing, and then when I slow down my breathing, I'm breathing from my belly. My voice deepens. Now I have my podcast voice. I'm in relationship with you. I'm listening to you. I don't have to think of the next question, right? So that's the first thing. And then I teach them the 1 minute meditation. So a lot of my clients are, just ADHD crazy people, right? And I'm like, just sit with your cup of coffee or your tea, look out the window, don't touch your phone, don't do anything, and just breathe for 1 minute, a whole minute. And we start there, and I start to teach them practices, that homing device, so that when they're in the meeting and they notice that they're breathing shallow, they notice that they're reacting, they know they can reset and go, breathe. All right, I'm in. Okay, now I'm here. What was going on in this meeting? What was that? And then you can just get present. That it's so simple. But if you don't practice it, you don't know what that homing device is.
I love that, Mark. I really do. I at Nobody Studios, I started a bi-weekly meditation once, for leaders to join. And sometimes one person shows up, sometimes 5 people show up, and I'm like, I don't care, who shows up. But I'm going to offer this because I agree with you. Learning how to be present has so many benefits to it, right? And so I have a good friend, Tom Kotlerock, that is the guy that walks us through these experiences. And I've been doing it over a year, and I can tell you just how much I have learned and grown in just a year of spending just an hour every 2 weeks really being present. And I do that more than I just in those sessions. I do it way more. I try to do that every single day. But it's so important. And I'll just go back to the active listening thing. I just want to give everybody one tip, because I really believe that people don't know how to listen to each other. And this is what I do. It's just a simple, quick trip. I think my son thinks I talk to myself, and he's probably right. I do sometimes, but our brain can only do one thing, right? And so you call it becoming present, but it can't think and listen at the same time. It can only do one of those two things. And so one of the skills that I've really honed in on is reminding my brain that I have to paraphrase it back to that person, because unless you actually listen.
So proactive, active listening on your part.
Yes, exactly. So I have to say, if you and I are having a conversation, to say, Mark, I have to repeat back what Mark is telling me. Now I'm telling my brain that it needs to listen because I have to paraphrase it back. It kicks your brain into that active listening mode versus just kind of, okay, if I'm already thinking about where am I going to go to happy hour later, or which friends am I meeting up with? Mark, you've lost me. You lost me at that point. I'm no longer listening to you, right? So teaching people just that small skill of active listening by reminding your brain that it needs to paraphrase, and then getting to the habit of paraphrasing things back to people. Again, going back to effective communication.
What a great tool. That's so good.
Yeah, it's so simple but so effective, because then when you paraphrase something back, if I paraphrase something back to you and you're like, what? That's not what I was talking about. We can talk about it now versus me spending the next 10 hours of my time trying to do something thinking I heard you right, or I misunderstood you, whatever. Let's just clarify that right now and get on the same page versus, wasting everybody's time and energy.
I just want you to know I'm quoting you in the book. You're going to be in the book. I'm quoting you right here, right now with that exercise. It's amazing.
Yay, awesome.
What is Nobody Studio?
So Nobody Studios is a venture studio. I joined them about a year ago, and it's kind of a hybrid type of organization. Not everybody has heard of what a venture studio is, but just really quickly, it's a company creation machine. Our goal is to create 100 new companies in the next 5 years. So you got to be kind of crazy to join this journey, right? And this is why I've joined the journey. And I think most of the people on the leadership team will say we're a little crazy to be able to think we can do this. But so we're building companies. We've got like 14 to 16 companies in our studio right now, and we've we're right now in our angel investor round. And then we're going to be the first venture studio that's going to open up our studio to an equity crowdfund campaign. So anybody that wants to be a part of this journey, I mean, not everybody's got hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest, but you've got a few $1,000s you want to throw into the studio. What's cool is you get a piece of every company that comes out of the studio. For someone like me, who's never really been an investor, this is huge to kind of level the playing field, to give everybody an opportunity to be a part of this journey and own pieces of the companies that come out of our studio. So we're doing some amazing stuff there, Mark. And I would love to talk to you, offline about how you might be able to get involved in our journey too, because I think you bring a lot to the table.
Yeah, no, I've been fascinated by everything you do. And tell us about TrainX.
Yeah, so Train Extra is my company that I started 5 years ago. And, as an attorney, I would get really frustrated about just these basic skills that we're talking about, and how do we help people connect with each other, build better relationships. And really, when my son was born, I said I didn't want to litigate anymore, but I needed something to fill that space. And training and providing these workshops was an area where I felt like I could make a real big difference. So I just provide workshops on a variety number of different topics. I do a lot of my stuff virtually. I'm starting to see the in-person stuff pick up slowly now, but yeah.
Nice. Yeah. No, in person is definitely pick up, because we've decided COVID is done. Uh, uh, very cool. If people want to get in touch with you, where would they find you?
Yeah, if you're on LinkedIn, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I really share a lot of resources on some of the stuff that we've been talking about. And my website, trainextra.com, or you can look at nobodystudios.com.
Okay, and both of those are going to be in the show notes, so you don't even have to remember it. Just go to the webpage, click on it, and you can get more of Sejal. I love the way you explain things in regular person terms.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so understandable. It's doable. It's kind. Because a lot of times when we talk about a lot of these topics, it's very unkind. I've gotten blasted, for things, and it makes me not open, right? It just has me closed down. And you're such a good ambassador for the skills that you teach, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love what I do. And, I can tell you do too. So we are going to be collaborating together for sure. I know it.
And to everybody else, you know that I love you. I appreciate your time and attention more than you know. And I guess have a great rest of the day. Take care.